It all began in high school. Ben and I had been inseparable since I could remember, our friendship forging during freshman year. We were constantly together, classes, sports, video games, hanging out after school. It was that easy, natural kind of friendship that felt like it had always existed. Ben was my go-to person, the one I confided in no matter what. His humor, relaxed demeanor, and knack for putting me at ease were invaluable. Recently, however, a subtle shift had begun to alter the dynamic between us. It was elusive, difficult to pinpoint, yet undeniably present, lurking beneath the surface of our interactions. The realization dawned on me gradually, initially just a fleeting impression that things were evolving, though I couldn't grasp how or why. The uncertainty made me anxious, and I tried to dismiss it, hoping it would vanish, but it persisted. Every Thursday, swim practice was a fixture in our routine, a commitment we never missed. Afterwards, we'd unwind in the locker room, chatting about anything and everything while showering and changing. It was our dedicated time to de-stress after a long day. This particular Thursday, however, felt distinctly different. As we entered the locker room, our footsteps reverberated in the empty space, the rest of the team already gone. An unspoken tension hung in the air, a feeling I couldn't shake. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but my thoughts raced. I observed Ben as he casually dropped his swim bag on the bench. He appeared completely relaxed, as if it were any other day. But for me, everything felt altered. As we began changing out of our swim trunks, I couldn't help but steal glances at him. Ben possessed a natural self-assurance, an effortless way of carrying himself that I'd always admired. He never seemed preoccupied with others' opinions. Now, however, those admiring thoughts were becoming more complex. It wasn't just admiration anymore. My feelings were evolving, growing increasingly confusing. My heart pounded as I struggled to control my emotions. What was happening? Why was I developing these feelings for my best friend? I couldn't allow these thoughts to jeopardize our friendship. I couldn't risk ruining what we had by confessing that I might, just might, be falling for him. As I fumbled with my towel, avoiding direct eye contact, I felt Ben's gaze on me. He smirked, his usual prelude to teasing. "What's up, dude? You've been acting weird lately," he remarked, his tone light and playful, yet tinged with curiosity. I froze, unsure how to respond. He wasn't wrong. I had been acting strangely, attempting to conceal the emotions welling up inside. I felt the words forming in my throat, but I didn't know how to express them. What if he didn't reciprocate? What if I lost him as a friend? "Nah, just tired, I guess," I mumbled, trying to dismiss it, but Ben wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized my face. His gaze was intense, piercing through my defenses, straight into my soul. I felt the palpable tension between us, thick and electric, and I knew I couldn't keep up the pretense any longer. "Come on, man, you can tell me anything, you know that," he said, his voice softening. Something in his tone suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, he felt it too. My mind raced, and before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "Ben, I've been feeling something different lately about us. I don't know how to explain it, but it's more than just friendship." My voice trembled with nerves as the words hung in the air. I couldn't believe I'd just confessed. My heart hammered against my ribs. The ensuing silence was deafening. I held my breath, anticipating his reaction. Ben remained silent at first, his expression unreadable. My heart sank, convinced I'd ruined everything. Then, something unexpected happened. He reached out and placed his hand on my arm, his touch warm and reassuring. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. What I saw in his eyes wasn't rejection, but something else, something resembling understanding. "I've been feeling it too," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. My heart leaped. Could this be real? Was Ben actually saying what I thought he was? Relief and excitement surged through me, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope. We stood there in the locker room, the tension transforming into something new, something exhilarating. Ben's hand lingered on my arm, his fingers brushing my skin as if testing the waters. Every nerve ending tingled with anticipation, but I didn't know what would happen next. All I knew was that I didn't want him to stop. We remained frozen, Ben's hand still on my arm, the weight of our words hanging in the air. My mind raced, trying to process what had just transpired. Had I really just confessed my feelings to my best friend? And had he just admitted he felt the same? It felt surreal, like a dream where anything was possible. But this was real. His touch, his words, the way his eyes met mine. It was all happening. A surge of emotions, relief, disbelief, and something I hadn't yet identified, welled up inside me. "I didn't know how to tell you," I stammered, my voice unsteady. Fear gripped me, fear that confessing my feelings would irrevocably change things between us. Ben shook his head, his expression softening. "It's not weird," he said quietly. "Not if we're both feeling it." He moved closer, and I felt the warmth radiating from him. The space between us seemed to shrink, and with it, the tension that had been building for weeks. We were no longer just best friends. Something had shifted, irrevocably. I wanted to speak, to fill the silence, but words failed me. I stood there, heart pounding, thoughts a chaotic jumble. How had we arrived at this point? How had we gone from inseparable friends to standing in a locker room, confessing feelings we hadn't even realized we possessed? Ben must have sensed my hesitation, because he reached out and placed his other hand on my shoulder, his touch gentle yet firm. "I've been trying to figure out how to bring it up," he confessed, his voice low and steady. "I didn't want to jeopardize our friendship, but I can't ignore this anymore. I've felt it for a while now. I just didn't know if you felt the same." His words washed over me, a wave of relief and disbelief. This was real. Ben, my best friend, the guy I'd been secretly falling for, reciprocated my feelings. "I didn't know how to tell you either," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I thought if I said something, everything would change, and I didn't want to lose you." Ben's soft smile made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't just a smile of relief. It was a smile of understanding, of shared feelings that had been developing for weeks, maybe even months. "You're not going to lose me," he assured me, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "We'll figure this out together." Together. The word hung in the air, pregnant with promise and hope. It felt like a burden had been lifted, like the uncertainty and fear that had haunted me for weeks had finally dissipated. We were in this together, and that was all that mattered. Ben's hand slid from my shoulder to the back of my neck, his fingers brushing against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. The tension between us was transforming, evolving into something new. It wasn't the nervous, uncertain tension from before. It was something more, something charged with anticipation and excitement. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want him to stop. Ben's eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of us, standing in the quiet of the locker room, our unspoken feelings finally revealed. The world outside seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as if this moment was all that mattered. Without another word, Ben leaned in, his lips hovering inches from mine. I felt his warm, steady breath on my skin, and my heart raced in anticipation. Time seemed to stand still for a brief moment, and then, slowly, he closed the distance. His lips brushed against mine in a soft, tentative kiss. It was gentle at first, as if we were both testing the waters, unsure how to navigate this new territory. But as the kiss deepened, all the emotions we had suppressed for so long came rushing to the surface. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a release, a culmination of weeks of unspoken feelings, hidden desires, and quiet moments filled with longing. It was everything I had imagined and more. Ben's hand tightened slightly on the back of my neck, pulling me closer as the kiss grew more intense. I felt the heat of his body against mine, the steady beat of his heart through his chest, and it was intoxicating. Every nerve ending tingled with sensation, and I lost myself in the moment. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting against each other as we caught our breath. Ben's eyes held a look I'd never seen before, a mixture of affection, desire, and relief. It was as if all the walls we had built between us had finally crumbled, and we were seeing each other clearly for the first time. "I've wanted to do that for so long," Ben confessed, his voice soft and sincere. I smiled, my heart swelling with happiness. "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. It felt so good to finally say it, to finally be honest with him and with myself. For so long, I had feared the consequences of revealing my true feelings to Ben, but now that the truth was out, everything felt right. We stood there for a moment, absorbing it all, the weight of our confession still fresh but comforting. Ben reached for my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine in a simple gesture that felt more intimate than anything we had ever shared. It was like a promise. Whatever came next, we would face it together. "I guess we should get out of here before someone comes in," Ben said with a grin, his eyes twinkling with that familiar mischievousness I loved so much. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "Yeah, probably a good idea," I agreed, squeezing his hand before letting go. But even as we gathered our things, the connection between us remained. Something had shifted, something irreversible. As we walked out of the locker room, side by side, I couldn't help but feel like this was the beginning of something amazing. Our friendship had always been special, but now it was something more. But now our friendship was transforming into something deeper, more meaningful. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. As long as I had Ben by my side, I knew we could face anything together. Stepping out of the locker room, the world seemed to shift around us. The cool evening air brought me back to reality, yet simultaneously, everything felt different. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the school grounds, but in my mind, the world had blurred, leaving just the two of us in this new reality we had created. We walked in silence for a moment, side by side, words unnecessary. There was a comforting quality to the quiet, a sense of rightness. We didn't need to fill the space with chatter. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken in the locker room. Now it was simply about being present together. Crossing the field toward the parking lot, I glanced at Ben. He looked different, somehow lighter, as if the weight of unspoken tension had finally lifted. He caught my eye and grinned, his eyes sparkling with that familiar mischief I'd always loved. "What?" he asked, his voice playful, but with a newfound softness I hadn't noticed before. "Nothing," I replied quickly, a smile tugging at my lips. "It's just, I don't know. Everything feels different now." Ben nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment. "Yeah, it does. But in a good way, right?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Yeah, in a really good way." We reached the parking lot, and as we stopped by Ben's car, he turned to face me. That same intensity from the locker room was in his eyes, sending a jolt through me. But this time, it was excitement, anticipation, not nervousness. I wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever this was, whatever we were becoming, it felt right. "So what now?" Ben asked, leaning casually against the hood of his car, but there was a hint of something more in his voice, a question, an invitation. I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite my racing heart. "I don't know. We just figure it out, I guess. One step at a time." Ben smiled, that soft, understanding smile that reassured me everything would be okay. "Yeah, one step at a time." He reached out, taking my hand again, just like he had in the locker room. For a moment, we simply stood there, holding hands in the fading light, the rest of the world forgotten. "I'm glad you told me," Ben said after a while, his voice quiet but sincere. "I don't know how much longer I could have kept it in." I laughed, the sound light and easy. "Me neither. I was losing my mind trying to figure out what to do." Ben chuckled, shaking his head. "We're such idiots." I smiled, my heart swelling with happiness. "Yeah, but we figured it out eventually." Ben squeezed my hand and we stood there a moment longer, enjoying the peaceful evening and the newfound closeness between us. It was strange how everything felt the same, yet completely different. We were still the same people, still best friends. But now there was something more, something that had always been present but had only just surfaced. "We should probably get going," Ben said, finally breaking the comfortable silence. My mom's going to kill me if I'm late for dinner again. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Yeah, same here. Let's get out of here before we both get grounded. Ben grinned, and we released each other's hands as we climbed into his car. As he started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, I leaned back in my seat, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. I glanced at Ben, watching him as he concentrated on the road, his jaw set, his hands steady on the wheel. There was something different about him now, something I hadn't noticed before. Perhaps it was the way his shoulders seemed more relaxed, or the way he smiled at me whenever our eyes met. Or maybe it was simply the fact that we had finally been honest with each other. Whatever it was, it made me feel like we were heading in the right direction, even if I didn't know exactly where that direction would lead. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar streets blurring past. It wasn't until we were about halfway to my house that Ben broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. "Hey, about earlier," he began, glancing at me. "I just want you to know that nothing has to change between us. I mean, it will change, obviously, but we don't have to rush into anything. We can take things slow, figure it out as we go." I smiled, my heart warming at his thoughtfulness. "Yeah, I'd like that." Ben nodded, looking relieved. "Good. I don't want you to feel like we have to do anything, just because we're both feeling this. We can just be us, like we've always been." I nodded in agreement. "Yeah, just us." Such simple words, yet they carried so much weight. Me and Ben, best friends who had crossed a line neither of us had anticipated, now navigating this new reality together. As we pulled up in front of my house, Ben turned to me, his eyes meeting mine once again. There was that familiar spark, that connection that had always been there, but now it felt stronger, deeper, more real. "I'll see you tomorrow?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "Of course," I replied, smiling as I opened the car door, like always. Ben grinned, and I could see the relief in his eyes. "Good. See you then." I stepped out of the car, a sense of anticipation bubbling inside me. Everything had changed, yet somehow everything felt exactly right. Closing the door behind me and watching Ben's taillights disappear down the street, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. It wasn't perfect, and we didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't anxious about the future. We had time, we had each other, and that was all that mattered. Walking up the driveway, a lightness filled my chest that hadn't been there before. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The next day at school felt different, but not in the way I'd anticipated. Walking into homeroom, there was Ben, sitting in our usual spot, looking as calm and composed as ever. For a second, I wondered if yesterday had been a dream, a figment of my wishful thinking. But then Ben looked up, and when our eyes met, that easy smile spread across his face. The same smile as always, but now with a new warmth. Something deeper, something just for me. "Hey," he said casually, sliding his backpack aside to make room for me at the desk. "You ready for today?" I hesitated for a second, still processing the surreal feeling of seeing him like this. Normal, like nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Then I snapped back to reality and smiled, sitting down beside him. "Yeah, totally." Just like that, we fell back into our usual rhythm, discussing the English test we had later and how we'd probably fail because neither of us had studied. It was like nothing had changed between us, and in a way, it hadn't. We were still the same people, best friends who spent every day together, joking around and complaining about school. But beneath the surface, there was a new layer, an unspoken connection that made everything feel a little more intense, a little more meaningful. It wasn't something we needed to discuss or explain. It was simply there, woven into the fabric of our friendship, quietly present in the background. Throughout the day, I found myself constantly glancing at Ben, during lunch, in the hallway, even in class, and every time I'd catch him doing the same. It was like we shared a secret, an understanding that only we knew about, and it changed everything. After school, we headed to swim practice as usual. It was routine, a part of our daily lives, but today it felt more significant. I wasn't sure if it was just me overthinking things or if Ben felt it too, But as we changed into our swim trunks and headed out to the pool, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening, something neither of us could fully explain. Practice flew by, and before I knew it, we were back in the locker room, just like yesterday. But this time, the atmosphere was different. The air between us was lighter, more relaxed. The tension from previous weeks was gone, replaced by something softer, something that felt safe. We didn't speak much as we changed out of our wet swim gear, preparing to go home. It wasn't awkward. It was just quiet, comfortable, like we didn't need to fill the silence. But then, as I was about to put my towel in my bag, Ben spoke. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady. "About yesterday." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't expected him to bring it up, at least not so soon. But when I looked at him, his expression wasn't tense or uncertain. He was calm, like he'd been thinking about this all day, and had finally decided what he wanted to say. "I've been thinking about it," he continued, his eyes meeting mine, "and I just want to make sure we're on the same page." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going, but trusting him enough to let him lead. "I meant what I said yesterday," Ben said, his voice firm but kind. "I've been feeling this for a while, and I'm glad we finally talked about it. But I also don't want you to feel like we have to rush into anything. I want us to take our time, figure this out together, whatever that means." There it was again. Together. That word held so much weight, so much promise. I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. "Yeah, I want that too. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We can just take it slow." Ben smiled back, and for a moment it felt like everything was going to be okay, like we could handle this, whatever it was, and emerge just as close, if not closer, than before. "I'm glad we're on the same page," Ben said, pulling his shirt over his head. "I've been thinking about it all day, and I didn't want you to feel like I was expecting anything. I don't want to mess this up." "You're not going to mess it up," I said quickly, stepping closer and placing a hand on his arm. "We're in this together, remember?" Ben's eyes softened, and for a second, I thought he might reach for my hand again, like yesterday. But instead, he just nodded, his expression filled with gratitude. "Yeah, together." We finished dressing in silence, the air between us lighter now, filled with the understanding that we were both on the same page. We didn't need to rush. We didn't need all the answers right away. We had time to figure this out, to figure us out. As we left the locker room and stepped into the cool evening air, a sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't the same rush of excitement or nervous energy I had felt before. It was something quieter, more profound, a sense of contentment, of knowing that whatever happened next, we would face it together. It was quieter, more grounded than the previous day, like I was finally beginning to understand what this new chapter in our relationship would entail. Ben walked beside me, hands in his pockets, his usual easygoing demeanor restored. We didn't speak much on the way to the parking lot, but we didn't need to. The silence wasn't awkward or heavy. It was just normal. When we reached his car, Ben turned to me, his eyes meeting mine. There it was again, that look that conveyed more than words ever could, the one that told me he was just as nervous, just as excited, just as ready as I was. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice casual, but I could hear the underlying question, the real question. "Are we okay? Is this okay? Are we still us?" I smiled and nodded. "Same time tomorrow." And just like that, we were back to normal, or as close to normal as we could be, considering everything that had changed between us. But that was okay. We were figuring it out, one step at a time, and as long as we had each other, I knew we could handle whatever came next. As Ben drove away, I stood there for a moment, watching his car disappear down the road. I didn't feel the rush of uncertainty from the day before, or the fear of what might happen next. All I felt was calm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about the future. Because whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. Ben and I would face it together.